The deafening crack of the willow switch echoed through the modest homestead as Sarah Porter staggered backward, her cheek burning with the familiar sting of her mother's wrath. It was 1876 in the unforgiving territory of Wyoming, and 18-year-old Sarah had committed the grievous sin of speaking to a young man after Sunday service, without proper supervision. "You ungrateful, wicked girl!" Eleanor Porter's voice cut through the hot summer air as she raised the switch again. "After everything I've done to raise you proper, you'll ruin us with your loose ways." Sarah's hands trembled as she backed away, her cotton dress damp with sweat in the stifling heat of their small cabin. "Mama, please. I only asked him about his family's farm." Silence. Another blow landed across Sarah's arm, causing her to cry out. "You'll mind me, or so help me?" The sudden pounding on their front door froze Eleanor mid-strike. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as her mother's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who could that be?" Eleanor hissed, tucking the switch behind her skirts as she moved toward the door. When she pulled it open, Sarah glimpsed the tall silhouette of a man outlined against the setting sun. His broad shoulders nearly filled the doorframe, a dusty cowboy hat tipped low over his face. "Evening, madam," came a deep voice, the words wrapped in a drawl that suggested he'd traveled from somewhere farther south. "Name's Quentin Gray. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back. Wondering if I might trouble you for some water while I rest him before heading to town." Eleanor's posture stiffened. "We don't take in strangers, Mr. Gray." The man Quentin tilted his head slightly, and Sarah could feel his gaze move past her mother to where she stood, partially hidden in the shadows, cradling her arm. "I understand your caution, madam," he said evenly, though something in his tone had changed. "These are difficult times." Sarah watched as his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, taking in the angry red mark across her cheek, the way she held herself. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. "Miss," he addressed her directly, ignoring Eleanor's indignant huff, "might I trouble you for just a dipper of water from your well? Then I'll be on my way." Before Eleanor could object, Sarah stepped forward. "Of course, sir. I'll fetch it for you." "Sarah Porter!" Her mother's voice was sharp as a knife. "You get back inside this instant." But Sarah was already moving toward the door, desperate for even a moment's reprieve from her mother's rage. As she slipped past Eleanor, she felt Quentin's eyes on her, steady and observant. Eleanor grabbed Sarah's arm, her fingers digging painfully into the fresh welts. "You disobey me again, girl, and no more." The words were quiet but firm, spoken with such authority that both women froze. Quentin had stepped closer, his hand now resting casually on his holstered pistol. Not a threat, but a reminder of its presence. "Madam," he continued, his voice deceptively gentle, "I believe the young lady was just offering a kindness to a traveler. Where I come from, that's considered good Christian charity." Eleanor's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is my home, sir, and she is my daughter. I'll thank you to mind your own affairs." "Generally I do," Quentin agreed, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "But I find I can't abide seeing a woman struck. Not even by her mother." Sarah held her breath, watching the silent battle of wills unfold before her. Her mother was not accustomed to being challenged, certainly not by strangers, and never on her own property. But there was something about Quentin Gray that made even Eleanor Porter hesitate. "Perhaps," Quentin continued smoothly, "I could trouble you both for a meal as well. I'd be happy to pay, of course." He reached into his pocket and produced several coins that glinted in the fading light. "Been riding since dawn and haven't had a proper meal all day." The sight of money seemed to soften Eleanor's resolve somewhat. Times had been hard since Sarah's father died 3 years prior, and paying boarders were rare in this remote stretch of territory. "We're not running a hotel," Eleanor said stiffly, but her eyes remained fixed on the coins. After a moment's consideration, she stepped back. But I suppose we could spare some stew. For a fair price. Quentin nodded, removing his hat as he stepped over the threshold. Much obliged, madam. As he passed Sarah, their eyes met briefly. In that moment, she saw something that had become foreign to her kindness, and a silent promise of protection. Her heart stuttered in her chest, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt the faintest flicker of hope. Eleanor directed him to the small table in the corner of their main room. Sarah, fetch our guest some water and serve him a bowl of stew. Yes, Mama, Sarah replied, grateful for the excuse to busy her shaking hands. As she moved toward their modest kitchen area, she felt Quentin's presence like a shield at her back. The stew was simple rabbit with what few vegetables they'd managed to coax from their garden, but Quentin ate as if it were a feast, thanking them with genuine appreciation. Throughout the meal, Eleanor watched him with suspicion, while Sarah tried to make herself as invisible as possible, serving and clearing without meeting either of their eyes. "You're not from these parts," Eleanor observed, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "No, madam. Texas originally. Been working cattle drives and odd jobs since the war ended." "What brings you to Wyoming territory?" Quentin set down his spoon, considering his answer. "Heard there's good work with some of the larger spreads. Man can make a decent living if he's willing to work hard." Eleanor's tone made it clear she remained unconvinced of his story. "And where are you headed now?" "Sweetwater, madam. Got word the Rocking M might be hiring." Sarah's ears perked up at the mention of the Rocking M. The Murphy Ranch was the largest in the county, employing dozens of men. It was also nearly 20 miles from their homestead, a long ride in the gathering darkness. "You'll not make it before nightfall," Eleanor said, echoing Sarah's thoughts. Quentin nodded. "I'm aware. Plan to make camp once I found a suitable spot." "There's a storm coming," Sarah spoke up without thinking. When both her mother and Quentin turned to look at her, she flushed. I felt it in my joints earlier." "Always happens before rain." Eleanor's lips thinned at Sarah's presumption, but Quentin merely nodded thoughtfully. "Appreciate the warning, Miss Porter." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he addressed her. "Perhaps I should seek lodging in town instead." "Nearest town's Miller's Creek," Eleanor said, 7 miles east, "but they've no proper hotel, just rooms above the saloon." A moment of silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder that proved Sarah's prediction correct. Finally, Eleanor sighed heavily. "I suppose we have a small shed out back. It's not much, but it would keep you dry. For $2, you could stay the night." The price was extortionate for such poor accommodation, and they all knew it. But Quentin merely nodded, reaching for his money pouch once more. "That's very kind, Mrs. Porter." As Sarah cleared the table, Quentin stood to his full height, at least 6 feet, she guessed, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard physical labor. She couldn't help but notice the way his presence seemed to fill their small cabin, making it feel at once both more crowded and somehow safer. "I'll show Mr. Gray to the shed," Sarah offered, avoiding her mother's glare. "You'll do no such thing," Eleanor snapped. "I'll take him out myself. You finish clearing up and get to bed." Quentin settled his hat back on his head. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Porter." Then, turning to Sarah, he added, "And thank you for the fine meal, Miss Porter." The genuine warmth in his voice sent an unexpected shiver down Sarah's spine. She ducked her head, murmuring a quiet, "You're welcome," as Eleanor ushered him outside. Through the small window above the wash basin, Sarah watched as her mother led Quentin across the yard to the dilapidated shed where they stored tools and feed. It was little more than a lean-to with walls, hardly fit for a man his size, but he followed without complaint. When Eleanor returned, her face was set in grim lines. "That man's trouble," she declared, bolting the door firmly behind her. I want you nowhere near him. You understand me? First thing tomorrow, he's gone. Yes, Mama, Sarah replied automatically, though her thoughts remained with the stranger who had, however briefly, stood between her and her mother's wrath. That night, as rain lashed against the cabin's thin walls and thunder rolled across the sky, Sarah lay awake in her small bed, listening to the storm and thinking of the cowboy in the shed. Was he dry? Had the roof held against the wind? She knew the shed leaked in several places. She'd patched it herself last autumn, but her work had been hasty and inexpert. Just before dawn, when the storm had passed and the first gray light of morning seeped through her window, Sarah slipped from her bed. Her mother was still asleep, her snores rumbling from behind her closed bedroom door. Moving silently, Sarah dressed and crept outside. The yard was a mess of mud and puddles, her shoes sinking with each careful step toward the shed. She wasn't entirely sure what she intended to do or say, only that she needed to see him again, to thank him properly for his intervention. The shed door was ajar, and Sarah hesitated, suddenly unsure. What if he was still sleeping? It would be improper to disturb him. But before she could retreat, a voice called softly from within. Miss Porter? Is that you? Heart hammering, Sarah pushed the door open wider. Quentin was already awake and fully dressed, his bedroll neatly packed beside him. He sat on an upturned crate, cleaning his pistol by the light of a small oil lamp. I wanted to check if you were all right, she stammered. The roof leaked something terrible. His smile transformed his face, softening the hard angles and bringing warmth to his hazel eyes. I've slept in worse places. At least the company was pleasant. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment. In the better light, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with a strong jaw covered in stubble that suggested several days without a proper shave. I wanted to thank you, she said quietly, glancing back toward the cabin to ensure her mother hadn't followed. For what you said yesterday. Quentin's expression sobered as his eyes traced the faint bruise forming on her cheek. Has it always been like that? With your mother? Sarah looked down, shame washing over her. Since Pa died. She wasn't always this way. The grief changed her, I think, and worry about keeping the homestead. That's no excuse for raising a hand to your child. I'm 18 now. Hardly a child. Sarah attempted a smile, but it faltered under his steady gaze. Still her daughter, though. Quentin finished reassembling his pistol with practiced efficiency, sliding it into the holster at his hip. And no daughter deserves to be treated that way, no matter her age. The simple declaration, spoken with such conviction, brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away hurriedly. Mama will be waking soon, she said. She'll expect breakfast. Quentin stood, gathering his few possessions. Then I'd best be on my way. Don't want to cause you any more trouble. You're leaving? Now? Sarah couldn't hide her disappointment. Best not to overstay my welcome. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Your mother made it quite clear last night that she expects me gone at first light. Of course she had. Sarah's heart sank. For one wild moment, she'd imagined him staying just a little longer, just long enough for... What? She didn't even know. Only that the thought of his departure left her feeling strangely bereft. The Rocking M is a good outfit, she offered instead. My pa used to do business with Mr. Murphy. He's fair to his men. That's good to know. Quentin hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I have something for you, a token of my gratitude for the meal and shelter. He pressed a small object into her palm, a polished stone, smooth and cool to the touch. In the dim light, she could see it was a deep blue, shot through with veins of silver. It's a lapis lazuli, he explained. Found it years ago near a creek in Arizona Territory. Brings good luck, or so I was told. Sarah closed her fingers around the stone, oddly touched by the simple gift. Thank you. I've never seen anything like it. Sarah? Sarah, where are you, girl? Eleanor's sharp voice cut through the morning air, causing Sarah to jump. She quickly tucked the stone into her pocket. I have to go, she whispered urgently. Quentin nodded, but as she turned to leave, he caught her hand. Miss Porter, Sarah, if you ever need help. Their eyes met, and a world of unspoken words passed between them. Then he released her, stepping back as if realizing the impropriety of the gesture. Goodbye, Mr. Gray, Sarah said softly. Safe travels. She hurried back to the cabin, the weight of the stone in her pocket a secret comfort against the storm she knew awaited her. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her face thunderous as she watched Sarah approach. What were you doing in that shed with him? Answer me, girl. Nothing, Mama. I just went to tell him breakfast would be ready soon. The lie came easily, but Eleanor wasn't fooled. Her hand shot out, gripping Sarah's arm painfully. Don't you dare lie to me. I saw you through the window standing close, taking something from him. What was it? Money? Is that what you are now, a common harlot? No, it wasn't like that, Sarah protested, trying to pull away. Eleanor's other hand came up, ready to strike, but the sound of approaching footsteps made her pause. Quentin emerged from the shed, leading his horse, his expression hardening as he took in the scene before him. Mrs. Porter, he called, his voice carrying across the yard. I was just coming to thank you again for your hospitality. Eleanor released Sarah's arm, her face composing itself into a stiff smile. Mr. Gray, I trust you slept well? As well as could be expected. He approached them slowly, his eyes flicking briefly to Sarah. What do I owe you for breakfast? That won't be necessary, Eleanor replied coldly. We're not serving breakfast. Best you be on your way now. Quentin nodded, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Of course. Again, thank you for your kindness. He turned to Sarah. Miss Porter, it was a pleasure meeting you. Likewise, Mr. Gray, she managed, aware of her mother's watchful gaze. With a final tip of his hat, Quentin mounted his horse and rode away, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the morning stillness. Sarah watched him go, a hollow feeling expanding in her chest. As soon as he was out of sight, Eleanor rounded on her. I saw the way you looked at him. Shameless. Just like your Aunt Josephine. God rest her soul. She ran off with a cowhand too, you know. Ended up dead in a ditch before she was 25. He was just being kind, Mama, Sarah protested, though she knew it was useless. Kind? Men like that aren't kind without wanting something in return. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. What did he give you? Show me. Sarah hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her pocket. Show me, Eleanor demanded, reaching for her. With trembling fingers, Sarah withdrew the blue stone. Eleanor snatched it from her hand, examining it with disgust. Worthless trinket, she spat, flinging it into the tall grass beside the path. Just like his kind, full of empty promises and pretty words. Sarah watched helplessly as her small treasure disappeared into the weeds. Something inside her hardened in that moment, a seed of rebellion taking root. Get inside and start breakfast, Eleanor ordered. Then you'll mend those fence posts on the north side, and don't think I've forgotten your behavior yesterday. We'll discuss your punishment after chores. Sarah nodded mechanically, but as she turned toward the cabin, her eyes strayed to where the stone had fallen. She would find it later, she resolved. And she would keep it hidden, a small act of defiance against her mother's control. The days that followed passed in a haze of routine and carefully navigated conversations. Sarah performed her chores without complaint, enduring her mother's critical eye and sharp tongue with outward submission. But inwardly, Something had changed. Quentin Gray's brief presence had awakened something in her, a yearning for something more than this life of isolation and fear. Each night she held the recovered blue stone in her palm, running her fingers over its smooth surface and wondering where its giver might be now. Had he found work at the Rocking M? Was he sleeping beneath the stars? Or in a bunkhouse with other cowboys? Did he ever think of the girl with the bruised cheek and the controlling mother? Almost 2 weeks after Quentin's departure, an opportunity arose that Sarah hadn't dared hope for. Eleanor announced over breakfast that she needed to travel to Miller's Creek to sell their surplus eggs and butter. "I'll be gone overnight," she said, eyeing Sarah suspiciously. "Mrs. Abernathy has agreed to let me stay with her. I expect you to mind the place while I'm gone. No visitors, you understand? And I'll know if you've been slacking on your chores." "Yes, Mama," Sarah replied, careful to keep her voice neutral despite the leap of excitement in her chest. A whole day and night to herself, it was unprecedented freedom. The following morning, Sarah helped Eleanor load the wagon with their goods. As her mother climbed onto the seat and gathered the reins, she fixed Sarah with a stern look. "Remember what I said. If I come back and find anything amiss, everything will be just as you left it," Sarah assured her. The perfect picture of dutiful daughterhood. She stood in the yard, waving as the wagon disappeared down the rutted road. Only when it was completely out of sight did she allow herself a smile. For the first time in years, she was truly alone, answerable to no one but herself. Sarah spent the morning completing her regular chores, feeding the chickens, milking their cow, weeding the garden. But she worked with a lightness she hadn't felt in ages, humming softly to herself as she moved through the familiar tasks. By midday, she had finished everything that couldn't wait and rewarded herself with a cool bath in the stream that ran behind their property, a luxury her mother rarely permitted. As the afternoon stretched before her, Sarah considered her options. She could read one of the few books they owned, or perhaps practice her needlework without Eleanor's constant criticism. But her thoughts kept returning to the Rocking M Ranch and its possible new employee. The seed of an idea took root, reckless, perhaps even foolish, but too tempting to ignore. The Rocking M was far too far to walk, but their neighbor, old Mr. Finch, kept horses in his pasture not half a mile away. He had taught Sarah to ride when she was younger, before her father's death and her mother's transformation into the bitter woman she now was. Occasionally, he still invited Sarah to exercise his gentle mare when his rheumatism was acting up. Making her decision, Sarah changed into her sturdiest dress and boots. She wouldn't stay long at the ranch, just long enough to perhaps catch a glimpse of Quentin, to know he had found the work he sought. She could be back well before dark, and Eleanor would never know. Mr. Finch was dozing on his porch when Sarah arrived, his weathered face peaceful beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He woke at her approach, blinking sleepily before breaking into a smile. "Sarah Porter, as I live and breathe. Ain't seen you in an age, girl." "Hello, Mr. Finch," she greeted him warmly. "Mama's gone to Miller's Creek for the night. I was wondering if I might borrow Daisy for a few hours?" The old man's bushy eyebrows rose. "Your mama know about this borrowing?" Sarah hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "No, sir. But I'll have Daisy back before sundown, and Mama won't be home until tomorrow." Mr. Finch studied her for a long moment, his rheumy eyes taking in her hopeful expression. Finally, he sighed. "Where you planning on riding to, girl?" "The Rocking M," she admitted. I need to speak with someone there." A knowing look crossed the old man's face. "Wouldn't happen to be that tall cowboy came through about 2 weeks back, would it? Heard tell he got hired on at Murphy's place." Sarah's heart quickened. "You've seen him?" "Seen him in town last Saturday. Seemed a decent sort." Mr. Finch pushed himself to his feet with a grunt. "Your mama's a God-fearing woman, Sarah, and I respect that. But since Frederick passed, she's been too hard on you. A girl your age should have some joy in life. He gestured toward the pasture where his 3 horses grazed. Take Daisy. She knows the way to the rocking M used to belong to Murphy's foreman before I bought her. Just have her back by sundown, you hear? And if your mama asks, you never set foot on my property today. Gratitude washed over Sarah. Thank you, Mr. Finch. I promise I'll be careful. Within minutes, Sarah was mounted on the gentle mare, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as she set off toward the rocking M. The day was perfect for riding clear skies, a light breeze, and the sweet scent of late summer wildflowers filling the air. As Mr. Finch had said, Daisy seemed to know the route, picking her way confidently along the winding trail that led toward the sprawling ranch. Sarah had visited the Rocking M only once before, years ago, when her father had delivered a specially crafted saddle to Mr. Murphy. She remembered being awed by the size of the operation, dozens of buildings, hundreds of cattle, and more cowboys than she'd ever seen in one place. Now, as she crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, that same sense of wonder returned. The main house was an impressive 2-story structure with a wide veranda, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. Men moved about the property, engaged in the countless tasks required to keep such an enterprise running. Sarah slowed Daisy to a walk, suddenly uncertain. What had seemed like a grand adventure now felt foolish and impulsive. How would she even find Quentin among so many workers? And what would she say if she did? As she hesitated at the edge of the property, a rider approached from one of the distant fields. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the broad shoulders and easy posture of the man who had occupied her thoughts for 2 weeks. Quentin spotted her at almost the same moment, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to concern as he urged his horse forward to meet her. "Miss Porter?" he called as he drew near. "Sarah, is everything all right?" Sarah suddenly felt foolish under his questioning gaze. What had she been thinking, riding all this way unaccompanied? Yes, everything's fine. Words failed her as he dismounted, approaching Daisy's side with careful steps. Up close, she could see subtle changes in his appearance. His clothes were cleaner, his face freshly shaven except for a well-trimmed mustache. He looked like he belonged here, like he had found his place. "Your mother," he began, his eyes searching her face. "She's away," Sarah said quickly. "In Miller's Creek until tomorrow. She doesn't know I'm here." Relief flickered across his features, followed by a different kind of concern. "You rode all this way alone? It's not safe for a young woman to travel these roads unaccompanied." "I had to see you," she blurted, then flushed at her own boldness. "I mean, I wanted to know if you'd found work here, if you were all right." A slow smile spread across Quentin's face, warming his eyes. "I'm more than all right. Mr. Murphy hired me on as a wrangler. The pay's good, the work suits me, and I've got a dry place to sleep each night." He paused, his expression softening. "But I'm glad to see you, Sarah. I've thought about you often these past weeks." The simple admission sent a thrill through her that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "You have?" "I have," he confirmed. "Been worried too. How have things been with your mother?" Sarah looked down, absently stroking Daisy's mane. "The same. Better when I don't give her reason to be angry. Worse when I do." Quentin's jaw tightened, but he didn't press further. Instead, he gestured toward the main complex of buildings. "Since you've come all this way, would you allow me to show you around? Mr. Murphy's away on business, but his wife is here. It would be proper for you to meet her." The prospect of meeting Mrs. Murphy, a woman known throughout the county for her grace and kindness, made Sarah suddenly conscious of her simple dress and wind-blown hair. "I'm hardly presentable." "You look fine," Quentin assured her, his eyes sincere. "More than fine." Something in his gaze made Sarah's cheeks warm, but she nodded her agreement. I'd like that very much, but I can't stay long. I promise to have the horse back by sundown. We've plenty of time before then. Quentin took Daisy's reins, leading both horses toward the ranch house. Mrs. Murphy usually takes tea on the veranda this time of day. She enjoys company. As they approached the main house, Sarah grew increasingly nervous. The Murphys were the most prominent family in the county, their wealth and influence extending far beyond the boundaries of their ranch. What would the elegant Mrs. Murphy think of a homesteader's daughter arriving unannounced? Quentin seemed to sense her apprehension. Don't worry, he said quietly. Mrs. Murphy isn't one to stand on ceremony. She's originally from Boston, came west as a bride 20 years ago. Still keeps some Eastern ways, including afternoon tea. But she's as kind as they come. He tied both horses to a hitching post near the house, then offered Sarah his arm in a gesture that seemed both natural and strangely formal. Shall we? Sarah placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the cotton of his shirt. Together, they climbed the steps to the veranda, where a woman sat in a comfortable chair, a book open on her lap. Vivian Murphy was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair arranged in a simple but elegant style. Her face, though lined with age, retained a beauty that spoke of both good breeding and genuine happiness. She looked up as they approached, her expression curious but welcoming. Mrs. Murphy, Quentin said, removing his hat respectfully. I hope we're not disturbing you. This is Miss Sarah Porter from the homestead near Cripple Creek. She rode over to see how the ranch operates. It was a kind fiction, sparing Sarah the need to explain her true reasons for visiting, and she felt a rush of gratitude toward Quentin for his thoughtfulness. Mrs. Murphy set aside her book, her face brightening. Miss Porter, how lovely to meet you. I believe I knew your father, Frederick Porter, wasn't it? Fine craftsman. He made a saddle for my husband that's still the envy of every rancher in the territory. Yes, madam, Sarah replied, surprised and pleased that Mrs. Murphy remembered her father's work. That was my pa. Please, join me for tea. Mrs. Murphy gestured to the empty chairs nearby. Quentin, would you ask Maria to bring another cup and perhaps some of those scones she baked this morning? Of course, madam. With a reassuring smile at Sarah, Quentin disappeared into the house. Sit, my dear, Mrs. Murphy invited, indicating the chair beside her. As Sarah settled into it, smoothing her skirts nervously, the older woman's keen eyes took in her appearance with interest rather than judgment. Now tell me, how is your mother? I heard she's been keeping the homestead going since your father's passing. That can't be easy. No, madam, it isn't, Sarah agreed carefully. But Mama is determined. Something in Sarah's tone must have conveyed more than her words, for Mrs. Murphy's expression softened with understanding. It takes a special kind of strength to face widowhood, especially in this territory. Some women find healthy ways to channel their grief. Others, I'm afraid, let it twist them into someone they never intended to become. The perceptiveness of the observation left Sarah momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Quentin returned, followed by a young Mexican woman carrying a tray with an extra teacup and a plate of golden scones. Thank you, Maria, Mrs. Murphy said warmly as the woman set down the tray. Miss Porter, help yourself. Maria's scones are renowned throughout the county. The next hour passed in a pleasant haze for Sarah. Mrs. Murphy proved to be a charming hostess, full of interesting stories about her life in Boston and her early days in Wyoming territory. She asked thoughtful questions about Sarah's interests and education, never making her feel inferior, despite the obvious differences in their circumstances. Quentin remained with them, occasionally adding to the conversation but mostly content to let the women talk. Sarah was acutely aware of his presence, of the way his eyes followed her movements, the small smile that played at his lips when she spoke passionately about books or her love of horses. It wasn't until Mrs. Murphy mentioned the time that Sarah realized how late it had grown. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in deepening shades of gold and orange. "Oh," she exclaimed, setting down her teacup. "I should have left an hour ago. I promised to return the horse by sundown." "Whose horse did you borrow?" Mrs. Murphy inquired. "Mr. Finch's mare, Daisy," Sarah explained. "He was kind enough to lend her to me for the afternoon." Mrs. Murphy nodded. "Edgar Finch is a good man. But you're right to be concerned about the time. The roads aren't safe for a young woman alone, especially as evening approaches." "I'll escort her," Quentin said immediately. "With your permission, madam." Mrs. Murphy considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, that would be best. But Quentin, see that you're back before full dark. Mr. Reynolds is expecting your help with those new horses in the morning." "Yes, madam." Quentin turned to Sarah. "If you're ready?" Sarah rose, extending her hand to Mrs. Murphy. "Thank you for your hospitality, madam. It's been a pleasure meeting you." The older woman took Sarah's hand in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "The pleasure was mine, my dear. I hope you'll visit again perhaps for our harvest festival next month. We open the ranch to all our neighbors. There's dancing, food, games for the children. Your mother would be welcome too, of course." The invitation sent a flutter of excitement through Sarah, though she knew Eleanor would never agree to attend such a frivolous event. "That sounds wonderful. I'll try." Mrs. Murphy's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Do, and Sarah." Her voice lowered slightly. "If you ever need anything, the Rocking M is always open to you. Remember that." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Sarah could only nod her thanks before following Quentin back to where their horses waited. As they rode away from the ranch, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. The afternoon had been a gift, not just the chance to see Quentin again, but the warm welcome from Mrs. Murphy. The glimpse of a different kind of life where people spoke kindly to one another and laughter came easily. "Mrs. Murphy is wonderful," she said as they settled into an easy pace side by side. "I can see why everyone speaks so highly of her." Quentin nodded. "She's been good to me since I arrived. Makes a point of knowing every man who works for her husband, making sure we're treated fairly. The Rocking M has the lowest turnover of any ranch in the territory because of it." "Do you think you'll stay there? For a long time, I mean?" Sarah tried to keep her tone casual, though the answer mattered more than she wanted to admit. "I'd like to," he replied, glancing at her. "For the first time in a long while, it feels like I might have found somewhere worth putting down roots." The implication in his words hung between them, unspoken, but palpable. Sarah looked away, focusing on the path ahead as they entered a stretch of woodland that separated the ranch from the smaller homesteads to the east. "Your mother returns tomorrow?" Quentin asked after a comfortable silence. "Yes, by midday, most likely." "And what will you tell her about today?" Sarah sighed. "Nothing. I'll say I tended the garden and mended clothes. She'll check my work for flaws, find some, and lecture me on my carelessness. Then things will go on as they always have." Quentin's expression darkened. "It doesn't have to be that way, Sarah." "Doesn't it?" She met his gaze directly now. "What choice do I have? The homestead is all I know. Mama is my only family. Where would I go? What would I do?" "You could marry," he suggested quietly. "Start a life of your own." Sarah gave a bitter laugh. "Marry who? The only eligible men within 20 miles are either ancient widowers looking for housekeepers or boys I've known since childhood who see me as nothing more than Frederick Porter's odd daughter." "Not all of them," Quentin said, his voice low and intent. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she realized what he was saying. "Quentin, you hardly know me." "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're kind and brave. I know you endure your mother's cruelty without becoming cruel yourself. I know you ride like you were born in the saddle and brew the best coffee I've tasted west of the Mississippi." The compliments brought a smile to Sarah's lips despite her uncertainty. "That's not enough reason to marry someone." "No," he agreed, "but it's enough reason to want to know more. To see if there might be something worth building between us." They had reached the edge of the woods now, the open fields leading to Mr. Finch's property visible ahead. Sarah reined Daisy to a stop, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. "I can't just leave," she said finally. "Mama needs me, even if she has a strange way of showing it. And the homestead, it was Pa's dream. I can't abandon it." Quentin moved his horse closer, reaching across to take her hand. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today, only to consider possibilities you might not have allowed yourself to think about before." His touch sent warmth spiraling through her, both comforting and unsettling. "And if I do? Consider them, I mean. Then I'll be at the Rocking M, waiting to hear what you decide." His thumb traced a gentle pattern across her knuckles. "The Harvest Festival is in 4 weeks. Could you find a way to attend?" Sarah thought of her mother's inevitable objections, the punishment that would follow if she defied her. But for the first time, those fears seemed less important than the hope Quentin was offering. "I'll try," she promised. "Somehow, I'll be there." He smiled then, a smile that transformed his entire face and made Sarah's breath catch. "Then that's enough for now." They rode the rest of the way to Mr. Finch's property in companionable silence, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rolling grassland. When they reached the old man's cabin, he was sitting on his porch just as he had been when Sarah left, though his knowing smile suggested he wasn't surprised to see her return with company. "Right on time," he called as they approached. "Sun's just touching the horizon." Sarah dismounted, handing Daisy's reins to Mr. Finch. "Thank you for lending her to me. She was perfect." "Figured she would be." The old man's gaze shifted to Quentin. "Evening, young man. Treating our Sarah well, I hope." "Trying to, sir," Quentin replied respectfully, touching the brim of his hat. Mr. Finch studied him for a long moment, then gave a satisfied nod. "Good. Girl deserves some kindness in her life." He turned back to Sarah. "Better get on home now, before full dark sets in. And remember, I was never here today," Sarah finished with a grateful smile. "I remember." After saying their goodbyes to Mr. Finch, Quentin insisted on escorting Sarah the rest of the way to her homestead. The sky had deepened to purple by the time they reached the small cabin, the first stars beginning to appear overhead. "I should go in," Sarah said reluctantly as they stopped at the edge of the yard. "Thank you for today. For everything." Quentin dismounted, helping her down from his horse with hands that lingered at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for making the journey. Seeing you was unexpected, but very welcome." They stood close in the gathering darkness, neither quite ready to part. Sarah was acutely aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the way the dying light caught in his eyes. "Sarah," he said softly, "may I write to you? I know it might be difficult with your mother, but—" "Yes," she interrupted, surprising herself with her eagerness. "Mr. Finch could hold any letters for me. I visit him often enough that Mama wouldn't suspect." Quentin's smile was worth any risk such an arrangement might entail. "I'd like that very much." Before she could lose her courage, Sarah rose on tiptoes and pressed a quick, chaste kiss to his cheek. "Goodbye, Quentin. Until the Harvest Festival." She hurried toward the cabin then, her heart pounding as if she'd run miles instead of merely a few steps. At the door, she turned back to see him still watching her, a hand raised to the spot where her lips had touched his skin. With a final wave, Sarah slipped inside, closing the door behind her and leaning against it as emotions too complex to name washed through her. For the first time in years, She felt something that had become almost foreign hope, bright and insistent, pushing back the shadows that had surrounded her for so long. Morning brought reality crashing back in the form of Eleanor Porter's wagon rattling into the yard. Sarah had risen early, determined to ensure everything was in perfect order before her mother's return. She had cleaned, cooked, and even arranged fresh wildflowers on the table, a small touch of beauty that she knew Eleanor would likely dismiss, but that Sarah needed for herself today. "Well, the place is still standing," Eleanor observed as she entered, her critical gaze sweeping the cabin. "No disasters while I was gone?" "No, Mama," Sarah replied, helping her mother with her bags. "Everything was quiet. How was your trip?" Eleanor launched into a detailed account of her visit to Miller's Creek, who she'd seen, what prices she'd gotten for their goods, the latest gossip from town. Sarah listened with appropriate murmurs of interest, all while her mind drifted repeatedly to the previous day's adventure and the man who had promised to write to her. "And Mrs. Henderson mentioned that new hand at the Rocking M was asking about our homestead." Eleanor's voice cut through Sarah's thoughts, snapping her back to attention. "What?" she asked, heart suddenly racing. "What new hand?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed at Sarah's reaction. "Some drifter they hired recently. Tall fellow, dark hair. Mrs. Henderson said he was asking if anyone knew the Porter family, where our place was located." Her voice sharpened. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Sarah forced her expression to remain neutral despite the panic rising within her. "No, Mama. Why would I?" "That's what I'd like to know." Eleanor set down the bag she was unpacking, turning to face Sarah fully. "Because it seems mighty peculiar that a stranger would be asking after us specifically." "Perhaps he knew Pa?" Sarah suggested, grasping for a plausible explanation. "You know how respected Pa was for his leather work. Maybe this man wanted to commission something and doesn't realize Pa's gone." The explanation seemed to satisfy Eleanor, at least temporarily. She nodded slowly. "Could be. Your father's reputation did reach far and wide." A shadow crossed her face. Grief or bitterness? Sarah couldn't tell anymore. "Still, I don't like strangers asking questions. If this man comes around, you're not to speak to him. You understand? Send him on his way immediately." "Yes, Mama," Sarah agreed, relief flooding through her that her deception hadn't been discovered. Yet. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine chores and secret anticipation. True to his word, Quentin wrote to her not once, but 3 times. Mr. Finch delivered the letters with a conspiratorial wink, and Sarah devoured each one in private moments stolen while her mother was occupied elsewhere. Quentin's handwriting was surprisingly elegant for a cowboy, his words thoughtful and often funny as he described life on the ranch, the characters he worked with, and his growing fondness for Wyoming territory. But it was the personal passages that Sarah read over and over, committing them to memory. "I find myself watching the road each day, hoping to glimpse a certain rider on a borrowed mare. The days seem longer now, knowing you're so near yet too far to see or speak to. Is it strange that someone I've met only twice should occupy so much of my thoughts? If so, I find I don't mind being strange." Sarah wrote back when she could, leaving her letters with Mr. Finch and imagining Quentin's face as he read her words. She told him about her daily life, about books she'd read and loved, about her father's teachings and her dreams of someday seeing more of the world than just their small corner of Wyoming. Writing to him felt like breathing freely after years of carefully measured breaths. As the harvest festival approached, Sarah began subtly preparing her mother for the idea. She mentioned casually that several neighboring families were planning to attend, that Mrs. Abbott had spoken of bringing her famous apple pies, that even the Reverend would be present to give a blessing over the harvest. "Sounds like foolishness to me," Eleanor sniffed when Sarah first brought it up. "Dancing and carrying on when there's winter preparations to be made." But it's just one day, Mama, Sarah persisted. And Mrs. Murphy personally invited us. Wouldn't it be rude to decline? Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Murphy invited us? When did you speak to Vivian Murphy? Sarah realized her mistake too late. I didn't. Mrs. Abbott mentioned it when she stopped by last week. Said Mrs. Murphy was hoping for a good turnout from all the local families. It wasn't entirely a lie. Mrs. Abbott had indeed visited recently, though they hadn't discussed the festival. Eleanor seemed suspicious but not convinced of any deception. We'll see, was all she would commit to, which was neither a yes nor a definitive no. Sarah counted it as progress. 3 days before the festival, disaster struck in the form of a letter delivered by the traveling postman who passed through the area once a month. Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard her mother's sharp intake of breath from the porch where she'd gone to collect the mail. Sarah Elizabeth Porter. Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a whip. Come here this instant. Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized the envelope in her mother's trembling hand, cream-colored stationery from the Rocking M, addressed in Quentin's distinctive handwriting. He must have decided to send this letter through official channels rather than their secret arrangement, perhaps thinking it safer or more proper. What is this? Eleanor demanded as Sarah approached, her face white with fury. What have you been doing behind my back? There was no point in denying it now. The evidence was damning. It's a letter, Mama. I can see that it's a letter, Eleanor snapped, from that cowhand who stayed in our shed. The one who's been asking questions about us in town. Have you been corresponding with him? Meeting him? I visited the Rocking M once, while you were in Miller's Creek, Sarah admitted, deciding honesty was her only option now. Quentin works there. He's a good man, Mama. Mrs. Murphy thinks highly of him. Mrs. Murphy! Eleanor's laugh was bitter. So, you've been making social calls to the Grand Rocking M, have you? Playing the fine lady with Vivian Murphy while your mother sells eggs and butter to keep a roof over our heads? It wasn't like that. And this man, this drifter, you're on a first-name basis with him now? Writing love letters back and forth like some cheap novel heroine? Sarah felt her own anger rising to match her mother's. They're not love letters. We're friends. And yes, I call him Quentin, because that's his name. He's been nothing but respectful and kind to me. Kind. Eleanor spat the word as if it were poison. I know what kind of kindness men like him offer young, foolish girls. The same kind of kindness that left your Aunt Josephine ruined and dead before her time. Quentin is nothing like that. He defended me when you were beating me, or have you forgotten? He saw how you treat me, and he said, no more. The words hung in the air between them, Sarah's chest heaving with emotion while Eleanor stared at her as if seeing a stranger. So that's it, Eleanor said finally, her voice dangerously quiet. He's turned you against me, made you think your own mother is the villain in this story. Mama, no. Go to your room, Eleanor ordered, her fingers closing around the letter until the paper crumpled. You're confined to this house until further notice. No visitors, no trips to town, not even to church. And if I catch you trying to communicate with that man again, I'll have the sheriff arrest him for trespassing and attempting to corrupt a young woman under her mother's protection. I'm 18 years old, Sarah protested. You can't keep me prisoner here. As long as you live under my roof, you'll abide by my rules, Eleanor countered. Now go to your room before I decide a sterner punishment is needed. Recognizing the threat, Sarah retreated to her small bedroom, tears of frustration burning her eyes. Through the thin walls, she heard the distinctive sound of paper being torn. Quentin's letter, destroyed, unread. She pressed her face into her pillow to muffle her sobs, grief and anger warring within her. For 3 days, Sarah lived under what amounted to house arrest. Eleanor watched her constantly, assigning tasks that kept her within sight and removing any potential means of communication. The harvest festival came and went without either porter woman in attendance. Sarah imagined Quentin waiting for her, growing increasingly concerned at her absence. Had he tried to send another letter? Had he given up on her entirely? On the fourth day, as Sarah was washing breakfast dishes under her mother's watchful eye, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Eleanor moved to the window, her expression hardening as she recognized their visitor. "Stay inside," she ordered Sarah. "I'll handle this." Through the open window, Sarah could hear everything as her mother confronted Quentin on their porch. "Mr. Gray," Eleanor's voice was arctic. "I believe I made it clear to my daughter that your attention is unwelcome." "Mrs. Porter," Quentin replied, his tone respectful but firm. "I've come to speak with Sarah. I'm concerned about her welfare." "My daughter's welfare is my concern, not yours. She's perfectly well but has no interest in continuing your acquaintance. I suggest you leave our property immediately." There was a pause, and Sarah could picture Quentin weighing his options, perhaps trying to see past Eleanor into the cabin. "With all due respect, madam," he said finally, "I'd like to hear that from Sarah herself." Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "You have no rights here, Mr. Gray, none whatsoever. My daughter is under my protection and guidance. If you continue to harass this household, I'll have no choice but to involve the sheriff." "Is that what Sarah wants?" Quentin challenged. "Or is it what you want, Mrs. Porter?" "Sarah!" Eleanor called suddenly, making Sarah jump. "Come out here and tell Mr. Gray you want nothing to do with him, that his letters and attentions are unwelcome." It was a test one that would define everything that followed. Sarah dried her hands slowly on her apron, her mind racing. If she confirmed her mother's lie, Quentin would leave and likely never return. If she defied Eleanor openly, the consequences would be severe for both of them. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped onto the porch. The sight of Quentin after days of confinement was like water to parched earth. He looked tired, worry etched in the lines around his eyes, but those eyes brightened when they fell on her. "Sarah," he said softly, "are you all right?" Before she could answer, Eleanor cut in. "Tell him, Sarah. Tell him you want him to go and leave you in peace." Sarah looked from her mother's rigid face to Quentin's concerned one. In that moment, something inside her, some last thread of filial obedience stretched too thin, finally snapped. "No," she said clearly. "I won't tell him that, because it isn't true." Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "Sarah Porter, you will obey me." "I've obeyed you my entire life, Mama," Sarah interrupted, her voice surprisingly steady. "I've endured your criticism, your control, even your beatings. But I'm a grown woman now, not a child. I have the right to choose my own friends, to correspond with whom I please, to attend a harvest festival if I wish to." "After everything I've sacrificed for you," Eleanor began, but Sarah continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I'm grateful for the roof over my head and the food on our table. I've worked alongside you to keep this homestead going since Pa died. But that doesn't give you the right to isolate me, to control every aspect of my life, or to strike me when I displease you." Quentin had dismounted during this exchange, moving closer to the porch steps. His presence gave Sarah courage to continue. "I care for Quentin, Mama. He's been nothing but respectful and kind. He saw how you treated me that day, and stood up for me when no one else ever has." Eleanor's eyes flashed with a dangerous mixture of fury and hurt. "So, this is your choice? This drifter? This stranger? Over your own mother? The only family you have left in this world?" The question hung heavy in the air. Sarah felt the weight of it, the truth at its core. Eleanor, for all her faults, was indeed her only blood relation. The homestead was her inheritance, her connection to her father. Walking away from both would mean leaving behind everything familiar, everything secure. But staying would mean surrendering her chance at happiness, at a life free from fear and constant criticism. It would mean watching the light in her own spirit slowly extinguish, just as she'd watched it happen to her mother after her father's death. "It doesn't have to be a choice, Mama," Sarah said softly. "I don't want to leave you or the homestead. But I can't live like this anymore either. I need to be able to make my own decisions, to have friends, to perhaps someday have a family of my own." Eleanor's face hardened. "If you choose him, you choose to no longer be my daughter. You'll take nothing from this house but the clothes on your back. The homestead will never be yours. Is that what you want?" Sarah felt tears well in her eyes at the ultimatum. "What I want is for you to remember how to love without controlling. To be the mother you were before grief turned you bitter." For just a moment something flickered in Eleanor's expression, a flash of the woman she had once been, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by cold resolve. "You have your answer then," Eleanor said flatly. "Make your choice, Sarah. Here and now." Sarah looked at Quentin, who had remained silent during the confrontation. He met her gaze steadily, his expression conveying both support and the understanding that this was her decision alone to make. "I choose freedom," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I choose the chance to find happiness." Eleanor's face went white. Without another word, she turned and went inside the cabin, the door slamming behind her with a finality that broke something in Sarah's heart. For a long moment, Sarah stood frozen on the porch, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over her in waves. Then Quentin was beside her, his hand gentle on her arm. "Sarah," he said softly, "I'm so sorry. I never meant to come between you and your mother." She looked up at him, tears spilling freely now. "You didn't. This rift has been growing for years. Today just forced it into the open." She glanced at the closed door, behind which her mother was presumably fuming. "I should get some things." "She said only the clothes on your back," Quentin reminded her gently. "She might not let you take more." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the painful truth of this. "Then that's all I'll have." Quentin hesitated, then said, "I have no right to ask this of you, but will you come with me to the Rocking M? Mrs. Murphy mentioned after the festival that she was looking for a companion, someone to help with correspondence and household matters. When you didn't attend, she was concerned. I think she'd be pleased to offer you the position." Hope flickered through Sarah's grief. "You think she would?" "I know she would," Quentin assured her. "She spoke highly of you after your visit. Said you had a refined manner that reminded her of her own upbringing in Boston." The compliment warmed Sarah despite everything. "And where would I stay?" "In the main house, with the Murphy family. It would be completely proper," he added quickly. "You'd have your own room, fair wages, and the freedom to come and go as you please." It was more than Sarah had dared hope for a respectable position, independence, and proximity to Quentin without compromising her reputation. Still, she hesitated, looking back at the cabin that had been her home her entire life. "I should at least say goodbye," she said. "Try one more time to make her understand." Quentin nodded. "Of course, I'll wait here." Gathering her courage, Sarah knocked on the door. When there was no answer, she tried the handle, finding it unlocked. Inside, Eleanor sat at the table, staring blankly at the wall. "Mama," Sarah said softly, "I'm going now. I'll be staying at the Rocking M. Mrs. Murphy has a position for me there." Eleanor didn't look at her. "You made your choice. You're no longer welcome in this house. I know you're angry now, but someday I hope you'll understand. I'll always be your daughter, even if you don't want to be my mother anymore." Sarah moved farther into the room, reaching into the pocket of her dress to withdraw the blue stone Quentin had given her weeks ago. She placed it on the table. "I love you, Mama. When you're ready to talk, really talk. Not just give orders, I'll be waiting." Eleanor remained silent, her gaze fixed on some distant point, her hands folded tightly in her lap. After a moment of painful silence, Sarah accepted that there would be no reconciliation today. She turned and walked out of the cabin for what might be the last time, her heart heavy, but her steps determined. Quentin was waiting by his horse, his expression concerned. "How did it go?" Sarah shook her head. "As expected. She's made up her mind for now." Without further discussion, Quentin helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. Sarah allowed herself to lean back against his solid chest as they rode away from the homestead, drawing comfort from his presence even as grief threatened to overwhelm her. The journey to the rocking M passed in relative silence, Sarah lost in thoughts of what she'd left behind and what might lie ahead. When they finally arrived, Mrs. Murphy was on the veranda, almost as if she'd been expecting them. Her expression shifted from surprise to understanding as she took in Sarah's tear-stained face and the absence of any baggage. "My dear girl," she said, coming down the steps to meet them. "What's happened?" Over tea in Mrs. Murphy's private sitting room, Sarah explained the situation, her mother's controlling behavior, the ultimatum, her choice to leave. Throughout her account, Mrs. Murphy listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or murmuring sympathetically. "You've shown remarkable courage," she said when Sarah had finished. "Many young women would have chosen the familiar path, regardless of its difficulties." "I'm not sure it was courage so much as desperation," Sarah admitted. "I couldn't bear it anymore living in fear of her moods, her criticism, her punishments." Mrs. Murphy reached across to pat Sarah's hand. "Whatever you call it, you've taken a significant step toward claiming your own life. Now, Quentin mentioned I might have a position for you here, and he's quite right. I've been looking for a companion and assistant for some time. Someone to help with correspondence, household accounts, and occasionally to accompany me when Mr. Murphy's business takes him away from the ranch. Would such a position interest you?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Yes, madam, very much, but I have no references, no experience." "Nonsense," Mrs. Murphy interrupted gently. "You managed a homestead alongside your mother for years. That requires intelligence, diligence, and a multitude of skills. As for references, I trust my own judgment of character. You'll do splendidly." Relief and gratitude washed over Sarah. "Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "By being happy, my dear," the older woman replied with a warm smile. "This house could use some youthful energy. Now, let's get you settled. Maria will show you to your room and find you some suitable clothing until we can arrange for a proper wardrobe." Before Sarah could protest such generosity, Mrs. Murphy had risen and rung for the housekeeper. As Maria led her upstairs to a charming bedroom overlooking the ranch's eastern pastures, Sarah felt a curious mixture of emotions: grief for the relationship with her mother that might never heal, anxiety about her new position, but predominantly a budding sense of possibility that she hadn't experienced in years. Later that evening, after Sarah had bathed and changed into a borrowed dress that fit surprisingly well, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Quentin standing in the hallway, freshly shaven and wearing clean clothes. "Mrs. Murphy asked me to escort you to dinner," he explained. "If you're feeling up to joining the family." Sarah smoothed the unfamiliar fabric of her borrowed dress nervously. "I'm not sure I belong at their table." "You're not a servant here, Sarah," Quentin reminded her gently. "Mrs. Murphy considers you a companion, almost family. Mr. Murphy returns tomorrow, and she's eager for you to meet him properly." "And you?" Sarah asked, suddenly shy. "Where do you fit into this arrangement?" Quentin's smile was warm, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I work for the ranch, so I take my meals in the bunkhouse with the other hands, but Mrs. Murphy often invites me to Sunday dinners. She seems to have taken a liking to me, or perhaps she simply enjoys watching Mr. Murphy try to make sense of my fancy Eastern vocabulary, as he calls it." Sarah laughed at this, the sound surprising her after the emotional day she'd had. You do have a way with words that's uncommon among cowboys. That's because I wasn't always a cowboy, Quentin admitted. Before the war, I attended university back east. Studied literature, if you can believe it. Literature. Sarah's eyes widened with delight. But how did you end up as a wrangler in Wyoming territory? That, Quentin said, offering his arm, is a story best saved for another time. Shall we? Mrs. Murphy doesn't appreciate tardiness at her dinner table. As they descended the stairs together, Sarah felt a curious lightness despite all she had sacrificed that day. She had lost her home and been disowned by her mother, yet somehow she felt more herself than she had in years, as if she had been holding her breath for a very long time and was finally learning to breathe again. The weeks that followed marked a period of adjustment and discovery for Sarah. Her duties as Mrs. Murphy's companion were varied and interesting, helping with correspondence, organizing household accounts, reading aloud in the evenings, and accompanying the older woman on visits to neighboring ranches. Mr. Murphy, a jovial man with a booming laugh and shrewd business sense, welcomed her to the Rocking M with characteristic generosity, insisting she consider herself part of the family. As autumn deepened toward winter, Sarah gradually adapted to her new circumstances. She missed her mother, of course, and the homestead that had been her world for 18 years. Several times she drafted letters to Eleanor, trying to bridge the divide between them, but each attempt ended in the wastebasket. The wound was still too raw, the memories of their final confrontation too painful. Instead, Sarah focused on building her new life at the Rocking M. She formed a friendship with Maria, the Mexican housekeeper who taught her Spanish phrases and traditional recipes in the quiet hours of the afternoon. She grew comfortable with the rhythm of ranch life, the early morning bustle, as the men rode out to check cattle. The midday quiet when even the chickens seemed to doze in the Wyoming sun, the evening gatherings around the massive stone fireplace in the main house where Mr. Murphy told tall tales of his early days as a cattleman. And then there was Quentin. True to his word, he kept a respectful distance, mindful of Sarah's reputation and her position in the Murphy household. But they found moments to be together, chaperoned rides across the vast ranch lands, conversations on the veranda after Sunday dinners, occasional encounters in the ranch's small library where Sarah discovered they shared a love of Shakespeare and Walter Scott. Gradually, the story of Quentin's past emerged during these conversations. He had indeed been a university student before the war, the son of a prosperous Baltimore merchant with ambitions of becoming a professor of English literature. The conflict had changed everything. Quentin had enlisted with the Union Army, serving as an officer until a minor wound and severe illness sent him home before the war's end. "My father died while I was recovering," he told Sarah as they sat in the library one November afternoon, a chaperoned distance apart, but close enough to speak quietly. "Influenza. By the time I was well enough to take over his business affairs, the company was in ruins. My mother had tried her best, but she didn't understand commerce the way my father had." "What did you do?" Sarah asked, captivated by this glimpse into his former life. "What any dutiful son would do. I sold what remained of the business, paid our creditors, and used the little that was left to ensure my mother and younger sister had a comfortable place to live. Then I headed west, looking for work that would let me send money home regularly." "Your mother and sister, they're still in Baltimore?" Quentin nodded. "My sister married well last year, so my mother lives with her now. They're comfortable, which eases my mind. I write to them monthly." "Do they know you're here?" Sarah asked delicately, unsure how to phrase her real question. Quentin understood her meaning. His eyes softened as he looked at her. "They know I've met someone special. Someone who makes me consider putting down roots after years of drifting." The admission sent warmth blooming through Sarah's chest. "Is that what you want?" Roots? I think it might be, he replied, his gaze steady. With the right person. The moment hung between them, full of possibility, until Mrs. Murphy's discreet cough from the doorway reminded them they weren't alone. As December arrived, bringing with it the first heavy snows of winter, the Rocking M prepared for Christmas celebrations. The main house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, filling the rooms with the scent of evergreen. Sarah, who had never experienced such elaborate holiday preparations, threw herself into the festivities with childlike enthusiasm. "We'll have a proper Christmas ball," Mrs. Murphy announced over breakfast one morning. "We haven't hosted one since before the war. It's high time we revived the tradition." Mr. Murphy looked up from his newspaper with a groan. "Vivian, who would come to a ball out here in the middle of nowhere? The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and half the county's snowed in already." "Nonsense," his wife replied cheerfully. "The ranch hands and their families, the homesteaders from the valley, even some folks from Miller's Creek if the weather permits. We'll send the sleighs to fetch them if necessary. Sarah, you'll help me with the invitations, won't you?" "Of course," Sarah agreed, her mind already racing with the implications. A ball meant dancing, music, celebration, things that had been forbidden in the austere household of her upbringing. Her mother had considered dancing sinful, a view that many of their neighbors shared. Would anyone even accept the invitation? As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Murphy added, "And we'll need to have a new dress made for you, my dear. Something festive. Green, perhaps, to complement your eyes." Sarah blushed at the suggestion. "That's very generous, but I couldn't possibly." "You absolutely can and will," Mrs. Murphy insisted. "Consider it an early Christmas gift. Besides, every young woman should have at least one beautiful gown in which to dance with handsome young men." Mr. Murphy chuckled at his wife's transparent matchmaking. "I suppose young Gray will be expected to attend this gathering?" As a valued employee of the Rocking M, naturally he would be invited, Mrs. Murphy replied with feigned innocence, "along with all our other workers." Sarah ducked her head to hide her smile, but not before catching Mr. Murphy's knowing wink. The ranch owner had observed the growing attachment between Sarah and Quentin with benevolent amusement, occasionally teasing them, but never in a way that caused genuine discomfort. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Invitations were written and dispatched by riders to every household within 20 miles. The ranch's great room was cleared of furniture to create a dance floor. Mrs. Murphy unearthed sheet music from her Boston days, and Sarah discovered an unexpected talent for playing the ranch's seldom-used piano. True to her word, Mrs. Murphy arranged for a seamstress from Miller's Creek to create a new dress for Sarah. The result was a gown of deep emerald silk with delicate lace trim far more elegant than anything Sarah had ever owned or even imagined wearing. "It's too much," she protested when she first tried it on, awed by her reflection in Mrs. Murphy's full-length mirror. "I look like someone else entirely." "Nonsense," Mrs. Murphy countered, adjusting the fall of the skirt with practiced hands. "You look exactly like yourself, Sarah Porter." Perhaps for the first time. The night of the ball arrived with perfect winter weather, cold and clear, with a full moon illuminating the snow-covered landscape until it sparkled like diamonds. The main house blazed with light from every window. Lanterns lined the paths from the bunkhouses and stables, and the sound of tuning instruments drifted from the great room where local musicians were preparing for the evening's entertainment. Sarah helped Mrs. Murphy with last-minute arrangements, too nervous about her own appearance to change until the very last moment. When she finally retreated to her room to dress, she found Maria waiting to help with her hair. "You will be the most beautiful señorita tonight," the housekeeper declared as she arranged Sarah's dark curls in an elegant style. "Everyone will notice, especially Señor Gray." Sarah blushed at the teasing. "I'm not sure he'll even recognize me in this gown." "He would know you anywhere," I think, Maria replied with a knowing smile. A man in love sees with his heart more than his eyes. Before Sarah could respond to this startling observation, a knock at the door announced Mrs. Murphy's arrival to escort her downstairs. The older woman's face lit up at the sight of Sarah in her finery. "Oh, my dear," she said softly, "you look absolutely radiant." Together they descended to the already crowded great room, where neighbors and ranch hands mingled in their Sunday best. Sarah was surprised by the turnout. Nearly 50 people had braved the winter night to attend the Murphys' Christmas ball. Scanning the room, she recognized faces from church, from trips to Miller's Creek, even a few of the homesteaders her father had done business with years ago. Her heart sank slightly when she didn't immediately spot Quentin among the guests. Had he decided not to attend? Was he perhaps uncomfortable with dancing, with the social expectations of such an event? "Looking for someone?" Mrs. Murphy's voice held a hint of amusement. "Just taking in the crowd," Sarah fibbed, not wanting to appear too eager. Mrs. Murphy hummed knowingly. "Well, I believe Mr. Gray mentioned something about fetching more firewood before joining the festivities. Perhaps he'll appear shortly." As if summoned by her words, the door to the great room opened and Quentin stepped inside. Sarah almost didn't recognize him at first. Gone was the practical attire of a working cowboy, replaced by a well-cut dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaven, and as he scanned the room, Sarah could pinpoint the exact moment his eyes found her. His expression a mixture of surprise, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart race was worth every moment of preparation, every nervous flutter of anticipation. He moved through the crowd toward her with purposeful strides, seemingly oblivious to the knowing glances and whispers that followed his progress. "Miss Porter." He greeted her formally when he reached her side, though his eyes conveyed a far more personal message. "You look incredible." "Thank you, Mr. Gray," she replied, matching his formality while fighting a smile. "You clean up rather well yourself." Mrs. Murphy, observing their exchange with obvious satisfaction, excused herself to attend to other guests, leaving them in the socially acceptable privacy of a crowded room. "I was beginning to think you might not come," Sarah admitted once they were relatively alone. "And miss seeing you in that gown? Not for all the gold in California." Quentin's voice had dropped to a near whisper, his eyes never leaving her face. "Though I confess I feel somewhat out of place. It's been years since I attended anything resembling a ball." "That makes two of us," Sarah replied. "My mother considered dancing sinful. This is my first ball ever." "Then I'm doubly honored to be here." Quentin hesitated, then extended his hand as the musicians began a waltz. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Porter?" Sarah placed her gloved hand in his, excitement and nervousness warring within her. "I should warn you, I've never actually danced before. Not properly, at least." "Then we'll learn together," he promised, leading her toward the center of the room where other couples were already moving to the music. Under Quentin's gentle guidance, Sarah found dancing came more naturally than she'd expected. He led confidently, his hand warm at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them while still creating a sense of intimacy that made her feel as if they were alone, despite the crowded room. "You're a natural," he murmured as they turned gracefully around the floor. "Are you sure you haven't been secretly practicing?" Sarah laughed, relaxing into the rhythm of the dance. "Only in my imagination. I used to watch couples dancing at church socials and pretend I was among them." "And now you are," Quentin observed, his eyes warm. "How does reality compare to your imagination?" "Better," she admitted. "Much better." As the evening progressed, Sarah danced not only with Quentin but with Mr. Murphy, several ranch hands, and even a few of the neighboring farmers' sons. Each partner was polite and respectful, but she found herself constantly aware of Quentin's whereabouts, her eyes seeking him out whenever they were separated. During a brief respite from dancing, Sarah found herself near the refreshment table, accepting a cup of punch from a smiling Mrs. Murphy. "You're the belle of the ball, my dear," the older woman observed. "Every young man here has noticed you." Sarah blushed at the compliment. "It's the dress, not me." "Nonsense. The dress is lovely, but it's the woman wearing it that captures attention." Mrs. Murphy's eyes twinkled. "Especially Mr. Gray's attention. I don't think he's taken his eyes off you all evening." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A woman stood in the doorway, snow dusting her dark cloak, her face flushed from the cold. Sarah's cup nearly slipped from her fingers as recognition dawned. "Mama," she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. Eleanor Porter surveyed the room with obvious discomfort, her gaze finally settling on her daughter. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, gathering her courage, Sarah handed her punch to Mrs. Murphy and crossed the room to greet her mother. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said carefully when she reached Eleanor's side. "I received an invitation," Eleanor replied stiffly. "From Mrs. Murphy. It seemed impolite to decline." Sarah glanced back at Mrs. Murphy, who offered a small, encouraging nod. The older woman had sent an invitation to Eleanor without mentioning it to Sarah, a well-intentioned but potentially disastrous act of matchmaking between mother and daughter rather than between young lovers. "I'm glad you came," Sarah said, though uncertainty made her voice waver. "Would you like some punch? Or something to eat? The food is wonderful." Eleanor seemed to relax slightly at the mundane offer. "Punch would be nice. It was a cold ride over." As they moved toward the refreshment table, Sarah was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Everyone in the county knew of the rift between Eleanor Porter and her daughter, though few knew the details. Their appearance together at a social event was worthy of comment. Mrs. Murphy approached them, ever the gracious hostess. "Mrs. Porter, how lovely of you to join us. Welcome to the Rocking M." "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Murphy," Eleanor replied with careful formality. "You have a beautiful home." "Thank you. Sarah has become quite indispensable to us these past months. I don't know how we managed without her." Eleanor's eyes flicked to her daughter, an unreadable expression crossing her face. She was always a capable girl. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to a compliment Sarah had heard from her mother in years. The conversation continued in this vein, stilted but civil, until the musicians began another dance. "If you'll excuse me," Mrs. Murphy said, "I should check on the musicians. Sarah, perhaps you'd like to show your mother around a bit. The conservatory is particularly lovely at night with the moonlight on the snow." Taking the hint, Sarah led her mother away from the crowded great room toward the small glass enclosed garden at the rear of the house. The conservatory was indeed beautiful, with potted plants and small trees, creating a green haven despite the winter outside. Moonlight streamed through the glass ceiling, bathing everything in silver light. For several minutes they walked in silence, the distant music providing a backdrop to their unspoken thoughts. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "You look well," she said. "Happy." "I am," Sarah replied honestly. "The Murphys have been very kind to me." Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on a flowering plant rather than on her daughter. "And that young man Gray, he's still here?" It wasn't quite a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes, he works for the ranch." "I see." Eleanor's fingers brushed the petals of a white blossom. "He seems respectable enough." Coming from Eleanor, this was high praise indeed. Sarah felt a flicker of hope that perhaps her mother was softening her stance. "He is," she confirmed, "educated, hard-working, kind." "And in love with you, unless I'm much mistaken," Eleanor added, finally meeting Sarah's eyes directly. The blunt observation took Sarah by surprise. I. We haven't spoken of love. You don't need to. It's written all over his face when he looks at you. And yours, when you look at him. Eleanor sighed, a sound full of complex emotions. I came here tonight to see if you were truly better off without me, if leaving the homestead was the right choice for you. Sarah's heart constricted at the unexpected candor. And what do you think? I think, Eleanor said slowly, that I've been wrong about many things. Not all, but many. She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. After your father died, I was lost, afraid. The world seemed so dangerous, and you were all I had left. I thought if I could control everything, your behavior, your associations, your future, I could keep you safe. Safe, but unhappy. Sarah pointed out gently. Yes, Eleanor acknowledged with surprising humility. I see that now. Or I'm beginning to. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a familiar object, the blue stone Quentin had given Sarah months ago. I found this the day after you left. I was going to throw it away, but something stopped me. Perhaps a memory of who I used to be, before grief twisted me into someone I don't recognize anymore. She held out the stone, offering it to Sarah like an olive branch. I'm not asking you to come home, Sarah. I can see you've found your place here. But I am asking if we might try again, as mother and daughter, but differently this time. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she accepted the stone, its smooth surface cool against her palm. I'd like that very much, Mama. Eleanor nodded, her own eyes suspiciously bright in the moonlight. Good. That's good. A discreet cough from the doorway interrupted their moment of reconciliation. Quentin stood there, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry to intrude, he said. Mrs. Murphy sent me to let you know they're serving the Christmas pudding. Eleanor straightened, composing herself quickly. Thank you, Mr. Gray. We'll be along shortly. She hesitated, then added, perhaps afterward you might ask my daughter for another dance, with my blessing. The surprised delight on Quentin's face mirrored what Sarah felt in her heart. I'd be honored, madam. As he retreated to give them privacy, Eleanor turned back to Sarah. He's a good man, isn't he? Not just handsome and charming, but genuinely good. Yes, Sarah confirmed. He is. Then I was wrong about him too. Eleanor offered her arm to Sarah, a gesture that spoke volumes about her changing perspective. Shall we go sample this famous Christmas pudding? I hear Mrs. Murphy was quite renowned for her entertainments back in Boston. Together, they returned to the great room, where the celebration continued unabated. If people noticed the change between mother and daughter, they were too polite or too caught up in the festivities to comment directly. Mrs. Murphy, however, observed their linked arms with satisfaction as they approached the dessert table. I see you enjoyed the conservatory, she commented, her eyes twinkling. It's beautiful, Eleanor replied. As is everything about your home, Mrs. Murphy. Thank you for including me in your celebration. All of Sarah's family is welcome at the Rocking M, Mrs. Murphy said warmly. Always. The significance of her words wasn't lost on either Porter woman. Eleanor's stance softened further as she accepted a plate of Christmas pudding, her rigid posture relaxing by degrees as the evening progressed. Later, when Quentin claimed Sarah for the promised dance, Eleanor watched from the sidelines without objection or visible disapproval. As they waltzed past her, Sarah caught her mother's eye and was startled to see not resignation, but a wistful sort of happiness in her expression. Your mother seems different tonight, Quentin observed as he guided Sarah through a turn. More like a mother. She's trying, Sarah said. It won't be perfect right away, but it's a beginning. I'm glad, he replied sincerely, for both of you. As the dance ended, Quentin retained her hand, an unusual seriousness replacing his earlier light manner. Sarah, There's something I've been wanting to ask you. Something important. Sarah's heart quickened at his tone. What is it? Not here, he said, glancing around at the crowded room. Would you walk with me? Just to the veranda. It's still visible from the windows, so your reputation would be safe. Intrigued and slightly nervous, Sarah nodded. After ensuring her mother was comfortably engaged in conversation with Mrs. Murphy, she allowed Quentin to lead her to the veranda that wrapped around the front of the house. The night air was cold but refreshing after the warmth of the crowded ballroom, the moonlight casting long shadows across the snow-covered grounds. You're shivering, Quentin observed, immediately removing his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. Better? Sarah nodded, touched by the gesture and the lingering warmth of the garment. What did you want to ask me? Quentin took a deep breath, suddenly seeming less sure of himself than she had ever seen him. Sarah, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, watching you blossom here at the Rocking M, seeing your courage and kindness every day, it's been a privilege. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. I know it might seem sudden, and I would understand if you need time to consider. But I've known since that day I first saw you, really saw you standing brave, despite your fear, that you were someone special. Someone I could build a life with. Sarah's breath caught as she realized where this was leading. Quentin. I love you, Sarah Porter, he said simply. I think I've loved you since the moment I stood on your porch and said no more to your mother's treatment of you. I want to spend my life ensuring you never feel afraid or unloved again. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. Opening it revealed a delicate gold ring with a single pearl nestled in the center. This was my grandmother's, he explained. My mother sent it when I wrote to her about you. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to call you my wife. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes, happy ones this time. Are you sure? I have nothing to bring to a marriage, no dowry, no property since Mama disowned me. You bring yourself, Quentin replied earnestly. Your strength, your kindness, your spirit. That's worth more than any material possession. Through her tears, Sarah smiled. Then yes, Quentin Gray, I will marry you. The joy that transformed his face was a sight she knew she would remember until her dying day. Gently, reverently, he slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. May I? He asked softly, his eyes seeking permission for more than the kiss to her hand. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding as he drew her closer. Their first kiss was gentle, almost tentative, a promise of devotion rather than passion. When they parted, Sarah felt as if something fundamental had shifted in her world, aligning everything into its proper place. We should go back inside, Quentin said after a moment, though he made no move to release her. Your mother might worry. My mother, Sarah repeated, suddenly remembering the complexity of their situation. Do you think she'll approve? Only one way to find out, Quentin replied, offering his arm once more. Together? Together, Sarah agreed, linking her arm with his. They re-entered the great room to find the celebration still in full swing, though some guests had begun to depart due to the late hour. Eleanor sat with Mrs. Murphy near the fireplace, the two women engaged in what appeared to be an earnest conversation. Both looked up as Sarah and Quentin approached, their expressions shifting as they noticed Sarah's flushed cheeks and the new ring on her finger. Mama, Sarah began, her voice steadier than she expected. Quentin has asked me to marry him, and I've accepted. For a moment, Eleanor's face remained unreadable. Then, slowly, she rose from her seat, crossing to stand before the young couple. Sarah held her breath, unsure whether her mother's earlier tolerance would extend to this development. Mr. Gray, Eleanor said formally, you wish to marry my daughter? Yes, madam, Quentin replied with equal formality. With your blessing, if possible. Without it if necessary, though I hope it won't come to that. The directness of his response seemed to impress Eleanor. She studied him for a long moment, then turned to Sarah. And this is truly what you want? Marriage to a ranch hand? He's not just a ranch hand, Mama, Sarah corrected gently. He's an educated man, a veteran, a person of integrity and kindness. And yes, this is what I want more than anything. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then you have my blessing. And, she added with visible effort, my apology for misjudging you both. Mrs. Murphy, who had remained tactfully silent during this exchange, now rose to embrace Sarah. Congratulations, my dear, this calls for a toast. She signaled to a nearby servant, who quickly brought glasses of champagne for all of them. Raising her glass, Mrs. Murphy addressed the small group. To Sarah and Quentin, may their union be blessed with love, understanding, and many years of happiness. To Sarah and Quentin, Eleanor echoed, her voice stronger than before. As they sipped the champagne, Mr. Murphy appeared at his wife's side, having apparently been informed of the engagement. His congratulations were boisterous and sincere, his handshake to Quentin nearly dislocating the younger man's shoulder. We'll need to make arrangements, he declared. A proper wedding here at the ranch in the spring, I think. With your approval. Of course, Mrs. Porter. Eleanor seemed slightly overwhelmed by his enthusiasm, but nodded her agreement. Spring would be appropriate. It gives time for preparations. As the Murphys launched into a discussion of wedding plans, Quentin drew Sarah slightly aside, his expression bemused. They seem more excited about this than we are. I doubt that's possible, Sarah replied, glancing down at the pearl ring that now adorned her finger. But I'm glad they're happy for us. Your mother surprised me, Quentin admitted. I expected more resistance. Me too, Sarah agreed. Perhaps people really can change, given the chance. Speaking of changes, Quentin said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I've been meaning to tell you, Mr. Murphy offered me a new position yesterday, foreman of the East Section. It comes with a small house of our own, not just a bunk room. I was going to wait to accept until I knew your answer, but now. Now you can accept with confidence, Sarah finished for him, joy bubbling through her at the thought of a home with Quentin, a real home, filled with love and respect, rather than fear and control. A home of our own, he mused, his eyes warm as they met hers. It sounds almost too good to be true. But it is true, Sarah assured him, squeezing his hand. All of it. As the Christmas ball continued around them, Sarah looked from Quentin to her mother, now deep in conversation with Mrs. Murphy about wedding preparations to the festive scene that surrounded them. 6 months ago, she could never have imagined this moment. Engaged to a man who respected and cherished her, reconciling with her mother, surrounded by friends who wished them well. It had all begun with a simple, powerful phrase spoken by a stranger on her porch. No more. No more fear, no more control, no more accepting treatment that diminished her worth. Those 2 words had changed the course of her life, setting her on a path toward love and freedom she hadn't dared to dream possible. As Quentin led her back to the dance floor for what would be the final waltz of the evening, Sarah Porter, soon to be Sarah Gray, knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of her story were just beginning to unfold.